Well, hi, Edre here. Back again with a new album review, and today I'm going to be reviewing the brand new Nav album, Emergency Tsunami. We're back with a new Nav album. What can I say? If you've been watching this channel since I started this back in January, I already covered a Nav album. In fact, in that video where I was doing my review of Good Intentions, I even covered the second one, the Brown Boy thing that he put out too, as the deluxe edition. So, yeah, I've already reviewed him like twice. And he's back with a brand new surprise album, Emergency Tsunami. Do people really take Nav as serious as they take, say, Travis Scott, Young Thug, so many other artists out there? Not really. At least not amongst the music more critical community. And I could see why. You know, an artist like Young Thug, an artist like Travis Scott for sure, or even an artist like Don Toliver that I like quite a bit, have all kind of crafted out their own little niche and have definitely, moved the genre in the right direction. However, when a genre gets so overexposed, like trap and a lot of this era of hip-hop does, you get a lot of people who kind of jump on the bandwagon of this that are not as talented rapping wise, and what we end up getting is Nav. Now, let me be right off the bat here. I don't hate Nav. I actually think that Nav could be a lot worse. I think that at the very least, he does kind of give what he has. Now, it doesn't mean he gives that much. It's not like he's really changing the game, but it's also not like he's still making the worst possible music ever. If anything, it's more of the most boring music ever. Nav on this album continues to have one of the most robotic and monotonous deliveries of any rapper out there. Really, especially out of all the trap rappers out there, it's very underwhelming. It feels so robotic. It's like an AI-generated trap song / trap album. That's what it feels like a lot of the time here. Some of the most monotonous flows appear on tracks like Young Wheezy, which just, I don't know, it gets so repetitive and it gets so ingrained into you. It's monotonous, it's repetitive, it's obnoxious. It could be, but at the same time, despite it being so repetitive, it's also just so boring. It's such a weak flow. And also on Young Wheezy, one of the things that I noticed was it's lit. Yeah, the Travis Scott ad-lib. He used the Travis Scott ad-lib. He's straight up taking other rappers, other artists' ad-libs now. That's interesting. And despite the album having a very monotonous and repetitive and boring delivery from Nav himself, there was one-liner that really did stick out to me as being interesting. Every now and then he drops a little something. He says, "Put her in Prada, 'cause I'm proud of her," on the song Nasty. Now I'm not giving him like 10 Grammys for that, but I am saying that, hey, maybe he has the capability of writing one good line per album. I will say this, I will give Nav this, the production quality on this album is definitely a step up from some of the previous albums. I definitely think the production is better than his previous albums, especially the ones that came out this year. And I really do think that even though the beats themselves are very standard, basic trap beats that I've come to know and expect from Nav, really at this point by a lot, the production is done by Wheezy, to Wheezy out of here. And overall, I feel like despite the beats themselves and the overall instrumentals being absurdly basic and simple, they're produced well. They have a pretty good bombastic, big sound to them that I do enjoy. And there's a little bit of some interesting instrumentation choices, little ditties that they added throughout, such as the little xylophone on Vetement Socks. That was a song that I thought was overall very average, but I did think that was an interesting little touch in the production there. And perhaps one of the things that really sticks out to me that I think I need to talk about is just the features on this, man. The features on this album really dial down their talent so much, just so they don't outshine Nav, to be honest with you. I mean, I think the biggest example is Young Thug. I know I bring up Young Thug in almost every hip-hop review I do, but that's because he's everywhere. And it's so obvious when he's not giving his all. And he's not giving his all on the song Repercussions at all. In fact, he is giving such a weak delivery on that song. One of his weakest features in a long time. Although I feel like part of that was just him being nice to Nav. He didn't want to outshine him. You know, there's not even much to go into when it comes into the track list here. The few tracks I already mentioned were the only ones that I thought were actually worth talking about here. So, what are my final thoughts on this album? I know this is a bit of a shorter review, but what are they? This might be a shocker, but I didn't entirely dislike or even hate this album. I actually thought that this was a step in the right direction for Nav, even if it's a baby step. And even though it still won't, he continues to be one of the most boring, average, and monotonous rappers out there, with little that makes him stand out amongst the crowd. I can safely say this is much, well, by much I mean on Nav standards, better than Good Intentions or Brown Boy Part 2. It's just overall, I feel like this was a bit more focused. This was a bit more put together nicely. His delivery is just as weak as it ever has been, but I will say the production does help this album out a bit. Some of the arrangements also help this album out a bit. I wasn't totally against some of the arrangements and choices they did there. But once again, it's a very average album. It's about as bland and average as it can get, so I don't hate it. But I've settled on giving this album a light 4 out of 10. Now, anybody that doesn't know my reviews says anything below a 5 is negative, anything above is positive. So a light 4 is technically a negative review, but it's kind of in that threshold of being a very average album. It's below average, far from being the most interesting hip-hop album I've heard this year, far from being it's definitely one of Nav's better albums, but he continues to be one of the most predictable and monotonous rappers out there. So unfortunately, Emergency Tsunami gets a 4 out of 10. Well, Nav, keep on doing what you're doing.